Consuelo Rose pushed open the ranch gate with her shoulder. Inside there was nothing. The sack she carried was the only thing that moved in that empty patio. Her siblings had given her that place as a mockery. They had laughed in her face when she said she wanted it. Welcome to Historias Entre Vidas, Between Loves. This is the story of a 58-year-old woman who accepted what everyone else discarded, and who found buried in that land something none of her siblings had imagined existed. The division was in March, 3 weeks after her mother died. The notary read the will in the living room of the big house, with the 5 Ross siblings seated around the table. Firm arrived first. He was the eldest, and the one who had administered everything while their mother aged. He already had the papers ready. He already knew what he wanted. The notary read. The big house went to Firm and his wife Patricia. The town lot to the second sister. The cattle to the third. And the hillside ranch on the outskirts of El Saltillo, Durango. The one that had gone 15 years without producing. The one with the half-finished roof and the old well that went to whoever claimed it. No one raised their hand. Consuelo raised hers. Everyone looked at her. Firm let out a short burst of laughter. He didn't look at her. He looked at Patricia, as if the thing were funny. Patricia covered her mouth with 2 fingers and said very slowly, in that voice of hers that never rose but always cut, "No wonder you never married, Consuelo. You always liked what's no use to anyone." The notary cleared his throat. The others looked at the floor. Consuelo did not respond. She said yes. She wanted the ranch. She signed where the notary indicated. She put her copy away in her bag and said nothing more in the whole meeting. That same day, before it got dark, Firm and Patricia sent a truck to the ranch. They took out everything that remained, the old kitchen dishes, the corridor chairs, the pine trunk, and the grandmother's rocking chair, which had been on that corridor for as long as Consuelo could remember. The grandmother had sat there every afternoon of her life to pray her rosary with her eyes closed and her back straight. The young man who drove the truck was named Rodrigo Leal. He was from the neighboring town, and he saw it all. He saw when Patricia entered the corridor, pointed at the rocking chair, and said, "That one too." He saw her when she took down the grandmother's embroidered shawl that had hung on the nail of the corridor for years and threw it on the patio floor, because she said those old things only gathered dust. Rodrigo Leal said nothing. He just picked the shawl up off the floor and folded it carefully. He gave it to Consuelo before getting in the truck. She took it without words and pressed it against her chest. When the truck left, there remained the empty patio, the corridor without chairs, and the smell of freshly stirred dust. Consuelo stayed standing by the gate with the shawl in her hands. She looked at the ranch. She looked at the patio. She didn't cry. She just waited for the dust of the road to settle, and when it settled, she went in. The ranch was on the outskirts of El Saltillo, 2 hours from the municipality by dirt road. Consuelo arrived the first week of April with her sack, the grandmother's embroidered shawl, and the decision not to leave. She arrived at dawn, when the cold of the Durango Mountains still bit at the hands. The central shack had 1 large room and 1 small one. The roof of the small room was caved in halfway. The corral was only walls without a gate. The threshing floor was full of scrub and acacias. The old well had water 4 meters down, water no one had drawn in years. But at the back of the patio, next to the boundary wall, there was a tree. Consuelo recognized it immediately. It was the old peach tree, the same one her grandmother had planted more than 40 years ago, according to what she'd been told. It was big now, with a thick, twisted trunk and branches that opened in all 4 directions as if they wanted to reach something. It had new shoots, small and green, pressed at the tips of the branches. It was alive. Consuelo stood in front of it a moment. She put her hand on the bark of the trunk. "Here we both still are," she said to it in a low voice. What Consuelo didn't know yet was that this peach tree held something her grandmother had left buried just for her. Something that had waited under the earth more than 30 years. That same afternoon, Don Eustaquio and Doa Remedios arrived from the adjoining property. They were both old, with faces weathered by years of sun and mountains. They had known Consuelo's parents since they were young. They had also known the grandmother. Don Eustaquio carried a pot of pot beans. Doa Remedios brought freshly made tortillas wrapped in a cloth napkin with embroidery. They didn't call out. They pushed the gate open and entered like one who enters a house where they have always been able to enter. "You're Consuelo, right?" "The one who stayed," said Doa Remedios. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am," said Consuelo. Doa Remedios put the beans on the fire without further explanation. Don Eustaquio pulled a couple of stones from the patio, arranged them in front of the corridor, and sat down. Consuelo sat too. The three of them ate with the sun sinking over the hills and the cold mountain wind seeping in through the cracks of the shack. Don Eustaquio spoke little. Doa Remedios asked how the road was, whether she'd had good weather to arrive, whether the sack was enough for the first days. No one spoke of the truck, or of Firm, or of Patricia. When they finished, Doa Remedios gathered the dishes with the same calm with which she had set them out. Before leaving, she stopped in front of the old peach tree and looked at it a moment in silence. "Your grandmother loved that tree very much," she said. "May God hold her in his glory. She never wanted them to cut it down. She said it was hers and the ranch's." Don Eustaquio nodded, but said nothing more. Consuelo tried to sleep that night on the cot she set up in the large room. The wind made noise on the broken roof. Outside, among the branches of the peach tree, an owl sang. At dawn of the second day, Consuelo was already in the patio with the old broom. She swept the corridor first, then the threshing floor. Then she went to the well and drew water with a rope and a bucket she found in the shed. The water smelled of fresh earth. She carried it in the bucket to the roots of the old peach tree and poured it slowly at the foot of the trunk, the way she had seen her grandmother do as a girl without quite understanding why. The ritual formed itself in the days that followed. At dawn, the cafeteria on the wood stove, the bucket at the well, the water for the peach tree before anything else. Then the cleaning of the corridor. Then the rest at midday, under the eaves with a gourd of atole that Doa Remedios sent her with Don Eustaquio. Then back to work until the sun sank into the hills. Don Eustaquio came in the afternoons, sometimes with Doa Remedios, sometimes alone. They brought things they didn't ask to have returned, some hens they no longer had use for, a new rope, half a sack of corn. One day Don Eustaquio came with a young man whom he introduced as his nephew. "Do you know how to fix roofs?" asked Consuelo. "Learning," said the young man. "Me too," said Consuelo. They fixed the roof between the three of them in 2 afternoons. One morning, cleaning the small room, Consuelo found the grandmother's embroidered shawl tangled on a hook behind the door. Not the one Rodrigo Leal had picked up off the floor. This was another, older still, of more faded colors, green and bone, with embroidery at the ends. 4 petaled flowers, the same ones her grandmother embroidered on winter nights. Consuelo stayed looking at it a long while. She shook it out. She folded it carefully. She smelled it. It smelled of thyme and dried lavender. She hung it on the nail of the corridor where Patricia had torn it down. Who put it back there? She asked Don Eustaquio that afternoon. Don Eustaquio took his time. "Your grandmother herself," he said. a little before she could no longer come. Did she know someone was going to stay? Don Eustaquio looked at her. She hoped, he said. Consuelo took her time asking the next thing, "And do you think I'll find what she left?" "You already arrived," answered Don Eustaquio. "That's the half of it." Doa Remedios crossed the patio with a gourd of coffee and added without stopping, "The other half is staying." "And you already stayed?" "Yes," said Consuelo in a low voice. "I already stayed." 3 days later, Consuelo found the photograph. It was among the loose bricks of the back wall, folded in 4, inside a paper envelope that time had turned brown. It was in black and white. It showed a young woman standing next to the old peach tree, much smaller then. The woman was carrying something against her chest with both hands, something wrapped in cloth. You couldn't see what it was. On the back of the photograph there was handwriting Consuelo knew. It was her grandmother's. It said, "For whoever has the heart to stay." Consuelo sat on the stones of the patio. She read the phrase 3 times. That afternoon she showed the photo to Don Eustaquio. The old man took it with both hands, looked at it a long time, and said, "That photo is from the last year your grandmother still came alone to the ranch." He stayed quiet a moment. Then he added, "That day she brought something with her. She didn't tell us what." Doa Remedios put a hand on Consuelo's arm. "Your grandmother always said there was something on this ranch for whoever stayed," she said. But she never said more. Consuelo put the photograph away in the pocket of the apron. That night, while the owl sang again among the branches of the peach tree, Consuelo thought that the tree was more than a tree, that the photo was more than a photo, that perhaps her grandmother's phrase was not only a farewell. What Consuelo was about to discover, no one in El Saltillo had imagined. The following week, Consuelo decided to clean the roots of the old peach tree. There was a large stone at the foot of the trunk that was raised, half pulled out of the earth by the roots pushing from below. She wanted to move it to level the patio floor. She started with the shovel first thing in the morning. The roots were thick and deep, and the earth beneath the stone was loose, looser than the rest of the patio, as if someone had stirred it once and time had slowly packed it down again. She dug 20 centimeters, 30. At 40 centimeters, the shovel struck something that was neither stone nor root. It was metal. Consuelo knelt. She removed the earth with her hands. The lid of a large round can appeared, the kind that used to be used for storing lard, rusted but whole. She pulled it out with both hands. It was heavy. Inside, wrapped in a cotton cloth that time had turned yellow, there was a leather bag, and inside the bag, pressed against one another, gleamed coins. Gold coins, 25 of them, of the kind used before Consuelo was born. Beneath the coins, folded in 4 with the same handwriting as always, there was a letter. Consuelo did not open it alone. She went to Don Eustaquio's property with a can under her arm. The old man opened the gate, looked at her, looked at the can, and said, "Come in, child." The 3 of them sat in Don Eustaquio's corridor, Consuelo, Don Eustaquio, and Doa Remedios. Consuelo put the can on the table and opened it. Doa Remedios crossed herself slowly. Consuelo took out the letter and read it aloud. Her voice came out firm at first. It faded toward the middle. When she reached the part that said, "For whoever had the heart to stay," she had to stop a moment. She swallowed. Don Eustaquio and Doa Remedios waited without moving. She went on. The letter said that the coins were the savings of an entire life, kept since the 40s, when the grandfather earned them from the corn harvests and entrusted them to his wife to keep. It said she had never told anyone because she knew the hearts of her children, that Firm would spend whatever there was, and that the others would follow Firm. It said that the land and what it held were for whoever had the heart to stay and care for it. Not the cleverest or the strongest. The one who had the heart. The letter was dated September 12, 1987, signed with the full name and flourish, Dolores Ross, widow of Ross. There was a long silence. Don Eustaquio said, "We knew she buried something. We never knew what or where. She told us only the one who came would know." Doa Remedios said, "And you arrived." Consuelo said nothing for a moment. Then she asked, "When did she bury it?" "We don't know for certain," said Don Eustaquio, "but the photograph is from many years ago. I think it was when she knew she could no longer come often," said Doa Remedios. "She didn't want it to be lost. She wanted it to wait for whoever came." Consuelo looked at the coins on the table. She looked at the letter. She looked at the photograph she had taken out of the apron pocket. Her whole life, she said in a low voice. She kept all this her whole life. "Yes," said Don Eustaquio, "for you." Consuelo said nothing for a moment. She felt a knot in her throat that took a while to go down. Then she asked whether the letter had legal value. Don Eustaquio said that was a question for an attorney, but that a letter with a date, a signature, and the title of inheritance Consuelo already had to the ranch counted for a lot. They called the attorney Domges that same afternoon. He was a notary from El Saltillo, a man of few words and a grizzled mustache. He read the letter twice. He examined the coins. He examined the title of inheritance to the ranch in Consuelo's name. Then he said, without beating around the bush, movable goods found within a duly inherited property belong to the heir. This letter of express will reinforces that position without leaving ambiguity. If anyone challenges it, these documents are sufficient before any judge. That night Consuelo went back to the ranch alone, with the can under her arm. She put the coins on the table next to the letter and the photograph. She looked at them a long time. Then she looked out toward the dark patio, toward the old peach tree that couldn't be seen but that was there. Something in her chest stopped hurting for the first time in many months. She crossed herself in silence and turned off the lamp. Furman arrived 8 days later. He was accompanied by Patricia and a young man with a tie who carried a leather folder. They came in a truck. Firm got out first with his fancy hat on, which was his way of arriving at places where he wanted it noticed who was in charge. Consuelo was sweeping the corridor when she saw them come in through the gate. She kept sweeping. Firm spoke without greeting. He said he'd heard Consuelo had found something on the property. That those things buried in the property were part of everyone's general inheritance. That he, as the eldest son, had rights that couldn't be ignored. The man with the tie nodded and took a paper out of the folder. Patricia looked at the freshly swept corridor. She looked at the grandmother's embroidered shawl hung on its nail. She looked at the photograph propped against the eaves. Then she looked Consuelo up and down and said, in that same composed voice as always, "In the end you did find something to stay for, didn't you? How convenient for you." Don Eustaquio was sitting on one of the patio stones with his arms crossed. Doa Remedios was standing next to the old peach tree. Neither of them moved. The attorney Domges appeared from the dirt road 2 minutes later. He carried his briefcase and the expression of a man who already knew exactly what he'd been called for. He put on the corridor table the grandmother's letter, the title of inheritance to the ranch, and a certified copy of the property registry. Then he said to the man with the tie, with great courtesy, "The movable goods of an inherited property belong to the heir of the property. This letter of express will confirms it with date and signature. If you have contrary arguments, you present them before the court of first instance." The man with the tie read the documents. He whispered something in Firm's ear. Furman clenched his jaw and said nothing. It was then that Don Eustaquio rose from his stone. He took off his hat and held it with both hands. He spoke slowly, with the voice of one who has lived much and no longer needs to raise it. Doa Dolores told us before she died that what she had left here was for whoever wasn't afraid to stay. All of you knew this ranch existed. None of you came. Consuelo came. What this land holds is hers. Doa Remedios said from the foot of the peach tree, "God deliver us from claiming what we didn't sow." Consuelo waited for Firm to look at her. When he looked at her, she told him without raising her voice, "I didn't come to inherit gold, Firm. I came because this ranch was our grandmother's, and someone had to take care of it. You took the rocking chair. I stayed with the tree. The tree had more." Firm and Patricia left without saying anything more. The man with the tie followed them. The truck kicked up dust on the dirt road and disappeared among the acacias of the path. Rodrigo Leal, who had returned to the ranch that week to ask if there was work, saw it all from the gate. That afternoon he told his mother what had happened. His mother told someone else. And so the story began to travel through El Saltillo. Consuelo stayed standing in the corridor until the dust of the road settled. Then she went to the old peach tree, put her hand on the trunk, and stayed there in silence, with the grandmother's shawl in the other hand, saying nothing. There was no need to say anything. That autumn, the old peach tree bore fruit for the first time in many years. The branches filled with small, sweet peaches that Doa Remedios taught Consuelo to turn into jam and syrup. The ranch's corridor smelled of cooked fruit and firewood. The hens Don Eustaquio had brought wandered around the patio with the tranquility of hens that already know no one is going to shoo them away. The well gave clear water. The threshing floor had new cornfield. Rodrigo Leal worked Monday through Saturday and called her Doa Consuelo, with a respect that had nothing to do with years but with what he had seen. The photograph of the grandmother was framed and hung on the corridor wall, next to the shawl embroidered with 4-petaled flowers. The letter was kept in the cleaned can, on the shelf, beside a wax palm Doa Remedios gave her on Palm Sunday. The coins, kept safe at the municipal notary's office, already had a name and registration. The old peach tree was in the center of the patio, laden, not adorned or fenced, just there in its place, with its open branches and its deep roots, as it had always been. One October afternoon, the four of them seated in the corridor, Consuelo, Don Eustaquio, Doa Remedios, and Rodrigo Leal, ate peach jam with freshly baked bread and café de olla. They didn't talk about Firm or Patricia. They talked about the corn, about the cold that was going to arrive, about whether it would be worth putting in more hens in the spring. When the sun sank into the hills, Don Eustaquio looked at the peach tree laden with the last fruits of the season and said in a low voice, Doa Dolores knew this was going to happen. She always knew. That's why she didn't cut down the tree, said Doa Remedios, even though they'd told her it was no use anymore. My mother told her to cut it down once, recalled Consuelo. She told her it took up space. And what did your grandmother answer? Asked Doa Remedios. Consuelo smiled, that the things that bear fruit need space. Don Eustaquio nodded slowly. She was right about everything, he said. Consuelo looked at the two of them. Then she looked at the tree. Then at the grandmother's shawl hung on its nail, and the framed photograph on the wall, and the can on the shelf with the wax palm beside it. She closed her eyes a moment. Then she understood something she had already been suspecting for some time. And so, where before there had been mockery and dust and a ranch no one wanted, something grew that is neither inherited nor bought, the certainty that there are loyalties that last longer than the life of the one who sowed them. Her grandmother had not buried only gold, she had buried trust. She had buried the proof that she knew someone, someday, was going to have the heart to stay when everyone else left. And that person was Consuelo. Not because she was the cleverest or the strongest, but because she wasn't afraid to stay with what everyone thought was worth nothing. Has someone ever believed in you just when you were beginning to doubt your own worth? If this story reached your heart, leave your comment and tell us which part touched you most deeply. Subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you don't miss any story. Share it with someone who needs to hear it today. With someone who is caring for something everyone else has already given up for lost and doesn't yet know they have a tree that's about to bear fruit. Until the next story, a heartfelt embrace from heart to heart. And they say in El Saltillo that still, in the autumns of much fruit, when the old peach tree of Doa Consuelo's ranch fills with blossom, the people who pass along that dirt road stop a moment to look at it. Because they know that tree holds a story its owner never had to tell anyone. The land said it all.